So thank you so much for all coming out this morning, and thank you so much to Creative Mornings Wellington for having me here today. I go to Creative Mornings in Auckland quite a lot, so I was really chuffed when you guys asked me to talk, and then quickly absolutely petrified. I'm not great at speaking off the cuff. I've seen all the other videos and people speak so well. It's given me a whole new appreciation, but I'm going to be reading from notes, and so there's going to be less quality eye contact, but I'll do my best to maintain. So my name's Yeshe, and I run a small gluten-free bakery in Auckland called The Midnight Baker. I'm a Cancer, protective little crab, and I'm an INFJ, as my mate Tom Selleck here is as well. So I'm going to talk on the topic of inclusive today, and I've got to admit that I felt pretty nervous prepping for this talk. Not because it's public speaking, I kind of weirdly enjoy that, but that it's because it's a topic that means a lot to me and I want to do it justice. I've talked with my family and my friends about our experiences of inclusion, or a lack of it, and found myself feeling really challenged and really stuck, but then ultimately clearer and stronger at the other end. Initially, I thought to talk about inclusivity, you need to start from why not being inclusive is problematic, talking about exclusion and discrimination and prejudice. Initially, I thought, and being the child of immigrants and a person of colour and growing up Buddhist, I thought this was going to be really easy for me to talk about from first-hand experience. But it's not that black and white, as I'll talk about. And my experience of inclusion hasn't been as bad as those groups that I belong to might suggest. So I'm going to talk about my upbringing, and I'm going to talk about my business as examples of what I think inclusivity can be. That's not to say that they're perfect, far, far from it. But I think that's the whole point that I want to get across. I'm working towards understanding how I can be more inclusive as a Yeshe, as a business owner, and as a member of my community. And I think it's so important that we have these conversations around inclusion so that we can address what we're doing really well and where we're falling short. So, in the mid-1980s, my parents moved to New Zealand to help establish a Buddhist centre down in Dunedin. My mum is from Tasmania, that's my family, and my little brother, so sad. Mum is from Tasmania, and it's me with a wombat, my Australian heritage, and my dad is from Sona, Tibet, so that's me with some of the kids at the Buddhist centre growing up. Everyone moved down to Dunedin as part of a community, like a mixture of people from Tibet and around the world that had lived together in Dharamsala, and they'd studied Buddhism, and they wanted to bring it back to the West. So I grew up amongst this community at the Dagi Buddhist Centre, so named after Geshe Nyawang Dagye, or we called him Gen Rinpoche. Every Sunday, we'd go to the centre just like other families go to church. So everyone would take their shoes off before entering the gompa, and these were where the teachings were held, and they'd grab a cushion and sit down on the floor. The morning would start with the chanting of prayers like Om Mani Padme Hum or Om Tare Tu Tare Soha, and then the adults would get ready for the teaching and us kids would scoot off out the back and play. There'd also be, on special religious dates, we'd have a ceremony called Tsog, and everyone would bring along food to share, generally like snacks and treats, and someone would bring fruit, always. We'd say prayers and we'd offer the food to the Buddhas, giving them all the nourishment and the goodness. And then afterwards we got like a little plate of something, a little bit of everything, and everyone would sit down and eat together. And I always strategically chose where I sat, because at the front you'd get like a little bit of all the good stuff, you were guaranteed it. But at the back, you'd kind of get like the shitty end bits, but maybe the all of something that you loved. And so we would trade with each other, and I loved the community that I was a part of was made up of a really diverse range of people. They were from all over the world, from different sexual orientations, from different backgrounds. There were monks and nuns and us lay people. Some people came to Buddhism to find solace after experiencing trauma or having struggled with addiction and mental health issues. And other people came to learn and find answers about their spirituality. Growing up, it provided a framework of acceptance and inclusion and compassion. I was taught not to harm others, be they bugs, animals, or my little brother. And we were taught about reincarnation and karma, about treating each other kindly and with respect. I was lucky to grow up surrounded, perhaps even sheltered, you could say, amongst this atmosphere of acceptance and diversity. My family was fortunate to be welcomed and accepted into New Zealand society with our different beliefs and appearance and culture, which is more than I can say for some of the Indigenous people of Aotearoa. And because our differences were embraced, we were able to reciprocate this in kind to others. So considering all of this, and in prepping for this talk, I came to think, who am I to speak about a lack of inclusivity then? And I started to feel like a complete imposter. Compared to other people of colour, I don't feel like I've been discriminated against as badly because I'm comparatively light-skinned, I'm able-bodied, I'm middle class, cis and heterosexual. I'm white passing. I don't work in advocacy or for marginalised people's rights. Don't get me wrong, I get the "where are you from?" question all the time. And anytime I need to give my name for something, I anglicise it to Jessie to save being called Yeti. I've been called exotic more times than I'd like to count, and it makes me feel like a piece of fruit. I grew up in exotic as South D, by the way, which is bogan. I've actually had more casual racism around the fact that I'm Australian than for being Asian or brown. So there you go. Inclusion is something that's fundamental to who I am, though. And I wondered why it was so if I hadn't had that much first-hand experience. Discussing this with a friend helped me realise that we don't exist alone on an island as individuals in a vacuum. We're members of family units and friend groups, religious centres, communities, workplaces. We know and see suffering as a universal human experience. And for me, growing up being taught about the struggles of the Tibetan people was where exclusion hit home really hard. My father escaped to India after the invasion of his homeland by the People's Republic of China in the 1940s and 50s. I'd grown up knowing and seeing the gross loss and suffering that the Tibetan people had gone through. 6,000 monasteries in Tibet were destroyed, along with the ancient religious texts and histories and artworks. And 1.2 million people, 1/6 of the entire population, died as a direct result of the occupation. If you compare that to New Zealand, that's 675,000 people, which is the combined populations of Wellington and Christchurch. I can't even begin to describe the horrors that went on during that time. And it makes me feel ill reading about the systematic suppression and destruction of Tibetan culture that continues today. I saw the ethnic heritage and religion that my family belonged to be the defining reason for persecution. And suffice to say, it's left its mark. Growing up, I participated in and went on to lead protests against the human rights injustices in Tibet, especially during the time of the Beijing Olympics. But I'm pretty introverted, and I felt painfully uncomfortable being at front and centre and eventually backed away from doing all of this altogether. I felt crippled by this sense of powerlessness to do anything to help the Tibetan people. And if I'm honest, I still do. I stopped reading and listening to the news for a long time because I just couldn't handle the suffering that people were going through on a day-to-day basis. And I didn't know what that I could do as one person to change any of that. And I felt like a coward with my head in the sand. But the feeling of wanting to do something never ever goes away. And for me, this became the impetus to act from my convictions around inclusivity and tolerance and loving, kind treatment of people. So I knew that I'd always wanted to do something of my own and that I wanted to work with food. Food brings people together. Starting the Midnight Baker was an opportunity for me to create something from scratch. I could fold my core values of compassion and responsibility into the fabric of its makeup. I started Midnight, which is how I refer to it, so I'll refer to it from that way from now on, back in 2015, after seeing a need for good gluten-free bread. I had really, really bad eczema, and I'd cut out gluten, and the options at the time were pretty terrible. At a very basic level, the Freedom Loaf was about eliminating that feeling allergy sufferers have of being a pain when it comes to food, and I wanted delicious inclusion. But I mean, anyone can make our bread. Here's a wee time lapse. Go. There we go. Anyone can make our bread. Anyone can make bread, even our bread, and I know that lots of people do, cafes, individuals and such, but I mean, ours is the best. But what's just as important to me as the product and the quality is the way we do things at Midnight. I wanted to create the kind of work environment that I would want to work in. This actually goes for a wee while. I'm going to have to skip past it. But that's me and Harry, so that's at the bakery, and Harry's my production manager. Whoa! I didn't know that was there. Whoopsie daisy. How do I skip? There we go. Okay, so we're a pretty diverse bunch at Midnight. We're from many different countries, of many different faiths. We live different lifestyles, have family, we're studying. And I wanted to be a place where everyone felt really safe and heard and seen and respected. That's Joyda. She's one of my old employees as well. So at a dinner gathering a few years ago, sorry, that's my whole team, by the way. I made them do this cheesy photo up the staircase, kind of like Dorky Family, Brady Bunch styles. And I felt sorry for this woman down here. She's doing her best to hide. Anyway, so at a dinner gathering a few years ago, a friend told me about the concept of Ubuntu, which is an Nguni Bantu term from Southern Africa. The following story that I'm going to tell you kind of explains what this term means. So, a traveller was passing through a village laden with fruit from a day's work. Coming across a group of children, she invites them to play a game. She puts a basket of fruit at one end of the field and she asks them to line up at the other end. And whoever reached the basket first would be able to take the whole thing home to their family. So she gives them the mark to go and she turns to the basket expecting to see all of the kids run past her. But to her surprise, when she turns back, all of the children are holding hands and walking together in a line across the field. And this is the essence of Ubuntu. Ubuntu fundamentally means I am because we are. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu explains, a person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for they have a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that they belong in a greater whole and are diminished when others are humiliated, tortured, or oppressed. I wanted this principle to be at the core of my business, the way that we treated and looked after each other and our customers and the way that we worked together. One of the ways that this translates into action at Midnight is being able to offer my staff the flexibility in their own work schedule so that they can go and focus on their own ventures or their families or their studies. My first ever employee, Joyda, who you saw before, had a lifelong love of popcorn and wanted to start her own popcorn business. So gradually, we reduced her shifts so that she had more time to go out to events and promote organic knowledge. but she still had enough work from us so that she could support herself and her family. Now, organic knowledge is well established within the Auckland food truck scene, and Joyde is out there facilitating and hosting workshops around plant-based eating, which is super cool. When I first started Midnight, I was given such an amazing opportunity by some friends of mine who owned a cafe space in Grafton. They let me use their kitchen after hours for next to nothing for a year as I got Midnight off the ground. When I found my own space, I wanted to be able to pass this gift on to other people. Now in our commercial kitchen, after we finish baking, we share our space with a few other food startups, and it gives them the same opportunity to test their product out on the market. So we've had makers producing everything from kombucha to donuts and to peanut butter to cacao kits. And it's really awesome to be able to pass this on and be like a part of their journey as well. We also have the occasional pop-up event, which is actually happening this evening. I'm going to fly back and go to. Wise Boys Burgers do the most amazing plant-based burgers, and they'll be popping up at the cafe this evening. And in a couple of weeks, Forrest, which is run by Plebita Florence, is going to be doing an 8-week residency. So she's going to come in every Thursday and do an 8-course degustation in the space. She's such a genius in terms of working with plants and challenging what is a conventional meal and where our ingredients should come from. We've also got a warehouse space out the back, and we've shared this with people doing meditation. We've had women's circles, and we even had a market day where we had entirely plant-based food trucks, and there were workshops on plant-based cooking and harakeke weaving and composting and those kinds of things, which was awesome. So, as well as Ubuntu, the Māori principle of manaakitanga really resonates with me. Manaakitanga is bound together with at least 4 other principles. So you have whānaunatanga, kotahitanga, wairoatanga, and rangatiratanga. Manaakitanga, this sort of explains it, encompasses reciprocal hospitality and respect from one individual or group to another. It acknowledges the mana of others as having equal or greater importance than your own through the expression of aroha, hospitality, generosity, and mutual respect. In doing so, all parties are elevated and the host is enhanced, building unity through humility and the act of giving. Owning a bakery and cafe, Manaakitanga modelled a holistic approach to being hospitable and welcoming, and sharing space and food with others, and of how we approach each other and our customers. One of the ways in which we can support our community is by sharing our bread with them. I believe strongly in the ability to be able to heal yourself from the inside out with good, nourishing food, within reason, and I feel like our bread can help facilitate this. So we sponsor a number of different charity and community groups each year, with values especially that align closely with ours. For example, the Kindness Institute holds a number of week-long workshops called Atawhai, which work with disadvantaged and at-risk rangatahi. They take them on retreat and they teach them skills about how to deal with stressful emotions and anxiety, and about conflicts and communication. They teach them about mindfulness and breathing skills and the body-mind connection through yoga. And we give them the bread so that they can nourish their bodies, and then the mentors can nourish their minds. They've got these awesome t-shirts which you can purchase that help fund their programs, which read Aroha Mai Aroha Atu, which is love and compassion received, love and compassion given. So, in saying all of this about Midnight and about myself, I need to acknowledge that I still have a lot of work to do. Like I said earlier, I feel like I've had my head in the sand. It was surprising how easy it was to find an image for that too. So I've been avoiding thinking critically and deeply about my identity because honestly, it's really confusing and it's really uncomfortable. I was really tempted to swear. It's when you don't have the language to be able to describe it or decode it. So part of the confusion for me comes from belonging to different groups that shift and change depending on the context. I know that I feel a certain way in certain situations, like when I'm asked, where are you from? But I haven't known how to explain why something so simple feels loaded. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, I benefit from privilege, white privilege, because I'm half white, class privilege, being able-bodied, heterosexual and cisgender. And so I don't feel justified in identifying with those who are oppressed. But I'm also a woman, and I'm also a person of colour. And I know of the bias and discrimination that exists in institutional structures that affects these groups. So I felt stuck in this weird kind of middle ground. And in describing this feeling to a friend, they pointed me towards intersectionality. So the term was coined in the 80s by Black feminist scholar and civil rights activist Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectionality represents a framework that attempts to identify how interlocking systems of power impact those who are most marginalised in society. It considers that various forms of social stratification, such as class, race, sexual orientation, age, religion, disability, and gender, do not exist separately, but are woven together. It explains the interconnected and compounding effect that belonging to each one of these groups can have to create a unique experience or challenge. Being introduced to intersectionality has been such a light bulb moment for me. It's so important and really, really useful in highlighting where privilege and injustice meet. And it can be the starting point to help us acknowledge our position and to understand the dynamics that shape our lives. So how does that relate to inclusivity? I believe that it can help frame the way that we look at injustice and discrimination within our society and how we can be more inclusive. After the Christchurch terrorist attack, there was widespread immediate reaction of, this is not us. And it's been discussed at great length, so I'm not going to rehash a whole lot of things. But what I do think it serves to highlight is, as Kimberly Crenshaw says, if we can't see a problem, we can't fix a problem. As a wider society, I believe New Zealand has a massive blind spot to the beliefs that undermine socially marginalised people and to the privilege many of us have that continues a lack of understanding and equity. You don't have to look far for examples. New Zealand was founded on colonial violence against Māori. The British were brutal and ruthless in their systematic destruction of Māori language and culture. But the realities of New Zealand's violent imperialist history are often skipped over or left unconsidered in today's conversations. You could take, for example, the current debate about whether to include the New Zealand Wars in the NZ curriculum, or the imminent bulldozing of sacred Māori land at Ihumātao, just outside of Auckland, which is being destroyed for affordable housing by Fletcher Construction. I highly suggest you guys look this up because it's absolutely disgusting what they want to do. Institutional discrimination needs to be acknowledged before, oh wait, this was also there, which I thought was awesome. My man, the Dalai Lama. So institutional discrimination needs to be acknowledged before real inclusive change can happen. I talked with my dad for his Buddhist perspective on this talk, and we spoke about the importance of interconnectedness. In the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, there's the belief that we need one another to survive, to grow, to learn, to live, to love, and to better ourselves. We can't do this alone. In a basic sense, we have a material dependence upon one another. So farmers grow our food, sewers make our clothes, bakers make our bread. But in a broader sense, it's about the fact that we all have the same universal desire, which is for freedom from suffering and pain. And our well-being depends on rising together and looking after each other. It's so very similar to the Nguni Bantu concept of Ubuntu and to the Māori principle of manaakitanga. Inclusion and compassion don't belong to any one culture, philosophy, or religion. They're universal. When we can see ourselves in other people and other people in ourselves, we recognise our shared humanity and can have greater understanding. We can see the benefit, and conversely, the harm that we can do to each other through actions, whether they're big or small. So we're not perfect. Nobody is. And in acknowledging that, here is our opportunity to improve. Better to be a bit shit, but aware of it, than walking around thinking that you know everything. And so I hope that what I've talked about can just ignite even one tiny little spark within you, as it did with me, to question why things are the way that they are, to look deeper into those uncomfortable places, and to look after your mental health while you're doing it. To acknowledge our position and to understand the histories and dynamics that have shaped our lives. Even through small actions such as self-reflection and conversation, do I feel that we can create ripples that go on to affect change, no matter how small they may be. Thank you.